When crime boss Dante Morelli discovers his dead brother's wife starving on the streets, the woman trying to sell her wedding ring for $20 doesn't recognize the black town car that pulls up beside her. But Dante Morelli recognizes her and the ring. It belonged to his younger brother, the one whose death he caused with a single cold decision 6 years ago. Now Elena Whitmore, once brilliant and untouchable, is homeless and desperate. She is destroyed by consequences Dante set in motion. The guilt he buried is standing right in front of him, and this time he can't look away. The rain came down hard in Brooklyn, turning the gutters into rivers and the sidewalks into mirrors that reflected nothing but gray. Dante Morelli watched it from behind tinted windows, his driver idling at a red light on a street he shouldn't have been on. He had meetings across town, contracts to negotiate, and a shipment that needed his signature before midnight. But Romano had taken a wrong turn, and now they were stuck in traffic on the kind of block where people didn't make eye contact and everyone moved fast. "Boss, you want me to take Atlantic?" Romano asked from the front seat. Dante didn't answer. His attention had caught on something outside. A woman standing beneath the broken awning of a closed pawn shop. She was too thin, her clothes hanging off her frame like they'd been borrowed from someone twice her size. Her hair, dark and tangled, stuck to her face in wet streaks. She held something small in her hands, turning it over and over. Even from this distance, Dante could see the shake in her fingers. "Boss, hold on." The woman stepped forward as a man in a stained jacket approached her. Dante couldn't hear what they were saying, but he watched her hold up the object. A ring, he realized. A wedding ring. The man leaned in, squinting, then shook his head and walked away. The woman's shoulders sagged. She looked down at the ring like it had betrayed her. Something about the way she moved made Dante lean forward. "Pull over, here, now." Romano didn't argue. The car slid to the curb, and Dante was out before it fully stopped. The rain hit him immediately, soaking through his suit jacket, but he barely noticed. He was already walking toward the woman, his shoes splashing through puddles, his eyes locked on her face. She didn't look up until he was 5 feet away, and then she did. Dante stopped moving. Her eyes, hollow, exhausted, framed by bruised dark circles, met his. For a second, neither of them reacted. She stared at him like she was trying to place a face from a dream. He stared at her like he'd seen a ghost because he had. Elena. Her name came out rough, disbelieving. She blinked and recognition flickered across her features. Not relief, not hope, just a slow dawning horror. "No," she whispered. She took a step back, then another. "Elena, wait. No." Her voice was sharper now, panicked. She clutched the ring to her chest and turned like she was going to run, but her legs gave out halfway through the motion. She stumbled, catching herself against the brick wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Dante moved without thinking. He reached for her arm to steady her, and she jerked away so violently she nearly fell again. "Don't touch me." He froze. She was shaking, not from the cold, not from the rain, but from something deeper, something that lived in her bones. "Elena, listen to me. What are you doing here?" Her voice cracked. "What do you want?" "I didn't know you were." He stopped. There were no good words for what he was seeing. No way to finish that sentence without making it worse. "I didn't know," she laughed. But it wasn't a sound that belonged to anything human. It was bitter and broken. The kind of noise that came from someone who'd run out of things to lose. "Of course you didn't," she said. "Why would you?" "You made sure I didn't exist anymore." The accusation hit him like a fist. He didn't flinch, didn't defend himself. He just stood there in the rain and took it because she was right. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long what? How long have you been out here?" She stared at him for a long moment, her jaw working like she was chewing on the answer. Finally, she looked away. "Long enough. Elena, I don't want your pity." She straightened, trying to pull herself together, but her hands were still shaking. "I don't want anything from you. Just leave me alone." She turned and started walking, her steps unsteady, her shoulders hunched against the rain. Dante watched her go, his mind racing through 1,000 calculations, 1,000 consequences. He could let her walk. He could get back in the car and pretend this never happened. She'd disappear into the city, and he'd never see her again. That would be easier. But easy had never been the problem. "Elena, stop." She didn't. "Please." That word please made her hesitate. She stopped walking but didn't turn around. "What happened to you?" Dante asked. And this time he couldn't keep the rawness out of his voice. What the hell happened? For a moment she was silent. Then slowly she looked over her shoulder. Her eyes were wet, not from the rain. You know what happened, she said quietly. You were there when it started. The truth of it sat between them like a third person, heavy and unignorable. Dante had spent 6 years building walls around that truth, burying it, locking it away. But standing here now, looking at what was left of Elena Whitmore, those walls meant nothing. Get in the car, he said. She turned fully now, her expression hard. Excuse me, you're soaking wet. You're. He stopped himself before he said the word starving, but it hung in the air anyway. Just get in the car. I'll take you somewhere dry. I'm not going anywhere with you. Elena, I said no. Her voice was firm, but her body betrayed her. She swayed slightly, catching herself against the wall again. Dante saw the moment she realized how weak she was. He saw the flash of shame that crossed her face. You can barely stand, he said, keeping his voice even. Let me help. She laughed again, that same broken sound. You don't get to help me, Dante. You don't get to swoop in and play hero. Not after. Her voice caught. Not after everything. I know. Do you? She took a step toward him, her eyes blazing. Do you have any idea what the last 6 years have been like? Do you know what it's like to lose everything? Your husband, your home, your life. All because someone decided you weren't worth protecting. Each word was a blade, and Dante let every single one cut. I know, he said again, quieter this time. You don't know anything. You're right, he met her eyes, but I'm asking you to get in the car anyway. She stared at him, her chest heaving, her hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Dante thought she might actually hit him. Part of him wished she would. Why? She demanded. Why now? You didn't care what happened to me 6 years ago. You didn't care when I lost the apartment, when I couldn't pay for the funeral, when I had nothing. So why the hell do you care now? It was a fair question. Dante didn't have a good answer. Because I can see you, he said finally, and I can't unsee it. Elena's expression shifted, something fragile and dangerous flickering across her features. She looked down at the ring in her hand, the gold band worn thin from years of turning it between her fingers. This was going to buy me 3 days, she said softly. Maybe 4 if I was careful. That's all I have left. Dante felt something twist in his chest. How much were they offering, he asked. $20. The number landed like a punch. That ring had cost his brother 3 months' salary. Marco had saved for it, planned for it, presented it to Elena on a rooftop under string lights, with his whole heart in his hands. $20. Get in the car, Dante said again, and this time it wasn't a request. Elena looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for something. Ulterior motives, manipulation, lies. Whatever she saw there, it wasn't enough to trust him, but it was enough to make her tired. If I do, she said slowly, it doesn't mean I forgive you. I'm not asking you to. She held his gaze for another long moment. Then, without a word, she started walking toward the town car. Dante followed, signaling Romano to unlock the doors. Elena climbed into the back seat and slid all the way to the far side, as far from Dante as possible. He got in beside her, careful to leave space between them. The leather seats were warm and dry. The heat was on. Elena pulled her arms around herself, shivering violently. Where to, boss? Romano asked. Dante didn't answer right away. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, and tried to reconcile the woman sitting beside him with the one he remembered. 6 years ago, she'd been sharp, vibrant, full of fire. She'd worked at a gallery in Manhattan, wore tailored dresses, and had a laugh that could fill a room. Marco had been obsessed with her, and Dante had understood why. Now she looked like a shadow, a ghost of someone who used to matter. Home, he said finally. Elena's head snapped toward him. No, you need food, rest, a place to clean up. I don't need anything from you. You can't even stand up straight. That's my problem. Elena, take me to a shelter. Her voice was sharp, desperate. Or a church. Anywhere but your house. Dante shook his head. No, you can't just... I can, he said, and there was no room for argument in his tone. And I am. She stared at him, fury and helplessness wearing in her eyes. For a moment, Dante thought she might actually throw herself out of the moving car. But then the fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. She slumped back against the seat, her head resting against the window. I hate you, she said quietly. I know. The drive to Dante's brownstone took 20 minutes. Elena didn't speak. She just stared out the window, watching the city blur past, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Dante sat in silence beside her, his mind already 3 steps ahead. Thinking about what she'd need, what he could offer, and how to keep her from running, the second they stopped moving. When they pulled up to the house, Romano got out first and opened the door. Elena didn't move. "Come on," Dante said. She turned her head slowly, looking at the brownstone like it was a prison. "I can't do this," she whispered. "You don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Not tonight." He stepped out of the car and waited. For a long moment, Elena sat frozen. Then finally, she moved. She climbed out slowly, her legs unsteady, and stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the building. Dante led her up the steps and unlocked the front door. The house was dark and quiet. His housekeeper had already gone home. He flipped on the lights and the entryway flooded with warm gold. Elena stood just inside the doorway, dripping onto the hardwood, looking lost. "There's a guest room upstairs," Dante said. "Second door on the right. It has its own bathroom. Towels are in the closet." She didn't respond to Elena. She blinked like she was waking up from a trance. "What?" "Go upstairs. Get dry. I'll bring you something to eat." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned and climbed the stairs. Dante watched her go, his chest tight. When she disappeared from view, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Dante went to the kitchen and started pulling things from the refrigerator. Bread, cheese, leftover chicken, fruit. He wasn't a cook, but he could put together a plate. His hands moved automatically, assembling food while his mind spun in circles. He hadn't thought about Elena Whitmore in years. Not actively, anyway. She'd existed in the part of his brain where he kept all the things he didn't want to examine too closely. The regrets, the mistakes, the people he'd failed. Marco's widow, the woman his brother had loved more than anything. The woman Dante had left to fend for herself. He told himself it was necessity. That after Marco died, the family had been under siege, and he couldn't afford distractions. That Elena had family of her own, people who would take care of her. That he'd sent money once, twice, and when it came back unopened, he'd taken it as a sign she didn't want his help. All of it true, none of it enough. He carried the plate upstairs and knocked on the guest room door. "It's open," Elena's voice called, flat and distant. He pushed the door open. Elena was sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a towel, her wet clothes in a pile on the floor. Her hair hung in dark ropes down her back. She looked small, fragile, like something that might break if he spoke too loud. "I brought food," Dante said. She glanced at the plate, then away. "I'm not hungry." Her jaw tightened. "Fine, leave it." He set the plate on the nightstand and stepped back. Elena didn't move. "There are clothes in the dresser," Dante said. "My housekeeper keeps extras for guests. They'll be too big, but they're clean. Thank you." The words were automatic, empty of feeling. Dante hesitated in the doorway. "Elena, don't." She cut him off, her voice hard. "Don't try to make this something it's not. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. That's it. Tomorrow I'm leaving. And going where?" She didn't answer. Dante studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Get some rest." He left the room and closed the door behind him. Elena didn't eat right away. She sat on the bed and stared at the plate like it might bite her. The smell of food made her stomach clench with hunger, so sharp it hurt, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it. This was Dante's house, Dante's food, Dante's charity. She'd sworn she would never take anything from him again, but her body didn't care about oaths. After 10 minutes, she picked up a piece of bread and tore off a small bite. It dissolved on her tongue, soft and warm, and she nearly cried at how good it tasted. She ate slowly, mechanically, until the plate was empty. Then she curled up on the bed, still wrapped in the towel, and stared at the ceiling. The last time she'd seen Dante Morelli, she'd been wearing black at Marco's funeral. He'd stood across the cemetery in a suit that probably cost more than her rent, surrounded by men in sunglasses, looking untouchable. He hadn't spoken to her, hadn't come near her. When she'd tried to approach him afterward, his security had turned her away. "Mr. Morelli has other obligations," one of them had said. Obligations. As if her husband's death was an inconvenience. She'd gone home that day to an apartment she couldn't afford, with bills she couldn't pay, and a future that had disappeared the moment Marco stopped breathing. And Dante had gone back to his empire, his power, his perfectly insulated life. Now 6 years later, he wanted to play savior. Elena laughed bitterly and rolled onto her side. She should leave, get up, get dressed, and walk out the door before he woke up. But she was so tired, and the bed was soft, and for the first time in months, she wasn't cold. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, hating herself for the relief. Downstairs, Dante sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking. The journal lay open on his desk. The private one he kept locked in the safe, the one no one was ever supposed to see. He flipped to a page near the middle, dated 6 years ago. The handwriting was tight, controlled, every word deliberate. Marco is dead. Vittorio's people took him 3 days ago. They wanted me to fold, to hand over territory, product, connections. They thought fear would make me weak. I called their bluff, held the line. It was the right strategic move. They killed him anyway. Dante stared at the words until they blurred. He'd written this entry the night after the funeral, sitting in this same chair, forcing himself to process what had happened, to turn it into something clinical, something he could file away and forget. It hadn't worked. Marco's face still haunted him, the way his brother had looked up to him, trusted him, believed Dante would always keep him safe. Dante had failed, and Elena had paid the price, too. He closed the journal and locked it back in the safe. Then he finished the whiskey in one burning swallow and went to bed. Elena woke to sunlight, streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back in a rush. The rain, the ring, Dante's face. She sat up slowly, her body aching. The towel had come loose during the night. She found clothes in the dresser, like Dante had said. Sweatpants, a t-shirt, a hoodie. She walked stairs, her bare feet soundless on the hardwood. The kitchen was empty. A note sat on the counter written in clean, precise handwriting. There's coffee. Help yourself to anything in the fridge. I'll be back this afternoon. Dante. Elena stared at the note, her stomach twisting. He'd left her alone in his house, unlocked. She could walk out right now. She should. But her eyes drifted to the coffee maker, where a fresh pot was waiting, and the fridge, which she knew was full, and the window overlooking the backyard, where something green caught her attention. A garden, or what used to be one. Elena walked to the back door and stepped outside. The yard was overgrown, wild, choked with weeds. But underneath the neglect, she could see the bones of something beautiful. Raised beds, a stone path, a trellis covered in dead vines. Someone had cared about this once. She knelt and pulled at a weed, then another. Her hands moved automatically, clearing space, finding soil. It felt good, purposeful. She didn't hear Dante come home. Didn't realize he was watching until he spoke. That was my mother's garden. Elena jumped, spinning around. Dante stood in the doorway, still in his suit, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to. It's fine. He stepped outside, looking at the mess she'd started clearing. She died 5 years ago. No one's touched it since. Elena brushed the dirt off her hands. It's beautiful, or it was. Yeah, they stood in awkward silence, the air between them heavy with things neither wanted to say. Why am I here, Dante? Elena asked finally. He looked at her. Really looked at her in the daylight, without rain or panic obscuring the truth. Because I owe you, he said. You can't pay back 6 years with a bed and breakfast. I know. Then what do you want? He didn't have an answer for that. Not one that made sense. I want you to stay, he said finally, until you're ready to leave. No strings, no expectations. Elena laughed, sharp and humorless. You think I believe that? I don't care if you believe it. It's the truth. She shook her head, turning back to the garden. You don't get to do this. You don't get to ease your guilt by keeping me like some kind of pet project. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Dante was silent for a long moment. Penance, he said finally. The word hung in the air between them. Elena turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. Whatever she saw there made her expression soften just slightly, just enough. I'm not your redemption, she said quietly. I know, and I don't forgive you. I know that too. She held his gaze for another moment, then looked away. I'll stay, she said, for now. But the second I feel trapped, I'm gone. Fair enough. Elena nodded and went back to pulling weeds. Dante watched her for a moment, then turned and went inside. Neither of them knew it yet, but the garden, broken, neglected, full of buried roots, was exactly where the truth would finally come to light. The first week passed in careful silence. Elena moved through the house like a ghost, keeping to the corners, avoiding Dante whenever possible. She slept late, ate alone, and spent hours in the garden pulling weeds with a kind of desperate focus that suggested she was trying to uproot more than just plants. Dante watched from a distance, never pushing, never asking questions. He left the house early for work and came home late, leaving space for her to breathe. But he made sure the refrigerator stayed stocked, that clean towels appeared in her bathroom, that the coffee was fresh every morning. They spoke only when necessary. Do you need anything from the store? No. There are leftovers in the fridge if you're hungry. Fine, the locks work from the inside. You're not trapped here. Elena had looked at him then, her eyes hard. I know, but she didn't leave, and Dante didn't ask why. On the 8th day, things shifted. Dante came home to find Elena in the kitchen, standing at the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. She turned when she heard him, her expression guarded. I found pasta in the pantry, she said, and sauce. I hope that's okay. Dante set his briefcase down slowly, caught off guard. You didn't have to cook. I know, she turned back to the stove, but I was hungry, and there was enough for two, so. She trailed off, shrugging. It wasn't an invitation exactly, but it wasn't a rejection either. Dante loosened his tie and sat down at the kitchen table. Thank you. Elena didn't respond. She just stirred the sauce and tested a piece of pasta, her movements efficient and practiced. When the food was ready, she filled 2 plates and set one in front of him without ceremony. They ate in silence. At first, Dante hadn't expected the food to be good. He'd expected functional, passable, but it was better than that. The sauce had depth, layers of flavor that spoke to someone who knew what they were doing. This is excellent, he said. Elena glanced up, surprised. It's just marinara. It's more than that. She looked like she wanted to argue, then changed her mind. My mother taught me before she passed. Dante nodded, filing that information away. He'd known Elena had lost her parents young. Marco had mentioned it once, but he'd never known the details. She would have liked this house, Elena said quietly, looking around the kitchen, the garden especially. She loved growing things. Is that why you've been working on it? Maybe. Elena pushed pasta around her plate. Maybe I just needed something to do with my hands. It's starting to look better. It's a mess. So was it before. She gave him a sharp look, but there was no real heat in it. Are you trying to be encouraging? I'm stating facts. Elena almost smiled. Almost. Well, the facts are that garden needs more than just weeding. The soil is depleted, half the beds are rotted through, and whatever disease killed those roses is probably still in the ground. Can it be saved? She considered the question seriously. I don't know, maybe with time and work? She paused. And money. Dante set down his fork. Make a list of what you need. I'll get it. I don't want your money. It's for the garden, not for you. It's still your money, Elena. He waited until she looked at him. I'm offering to buy soil and fertilizer, not absolution. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once, sharp and final. Fine, but I'm doing the work myself. I wouldn't dream of stopping you. They finished eating in silence, but it felt different now. Less hostile, more like 2 people sharing a space because they didn't have anywhere else to be. When Elena stood to clear the plates, Dante stopped her. I'll clean up. You cooked. She looked at him like he'd suggested something absurd. You don't have to do that. I know. I'm doing it anyway. Elena hesitated, then set the plates back down and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Dante washed the dishes slowly, methodically, listening to her footsteps overhead. When he finished, he found her standing in the hallway, looking at the framed photographs on the wall. Her attention was fixed on one in particular, Marco's college graduation photo. He was so young, she said, without turning around. Dante came to stand beside her. In the photo, Marco was grinning wide, his arms slung around Dante's shoulders. They'd been close back then, brothers in more than just blood. 22, Dante said. He told me he wanted to be a lawyer. Elena's voice was distant, lost in memory. He hated what you did, hated the business. He said he was going to get out, build something clean. I know, but he never did. No. Elena turned to look at him, her eyes sharp. Why not? Dante met her gaze. Because I asked him not to. The admission hung heavy between them. Why? Elena's voice cracked on the word. Why would you do that? Because I was building something, and I needed people I could trust. Marco was brilliant, strategic, and he was family. I convinced him that he could make a difference from the inside, that together we could change things. Dante's jaw tightened. I was wrong. Elena stared at him, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. He died because of you. Yes, and you never apologized. Never even looked at me at the funeral. I know. That's all you have to say. I know. Dante turned to face her fully. What do you want me to say, Elena? That I'm sorry. I am. That I've regretted it every day since. I have. But those are just words. They don't bring him back. They don't fix what I broke. Then what are you trying to do here? She gestured around the house, her voice rising. Why am I here? Why are you feeding me, housing me, pretending you give a damn? I'm not pretending. Then what is this? I don't know. The words came out louder than Dante intended. He took a breath, forced himself to calm down. I don't know what this is, but when I saw you on that street, trying to sell Marco's ring for $20, I realized I'd been lying to myself for 6 years, telling myself you were fine, that you'd moved on, that what happened to Marco was just business. He shook his head. And then I saw you and I couldn't lie anymore. Elena's eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. You want forgiveness. No. Dante's voice was firm. I want you to survive. I want you to eat and sleep and have somewhere safe to be. I want you to look at that garden and see something worth saving instead of just more death. He paused. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even want it because I don't deserve it. For a long moment, Elena just stared at him. Then she turned and walked upstairs without another word. Dante stood alone in the hallway, looking at his brother's face, frozen in time, and wondered if he'd just made things better or worse. The next morning, there was a list on the kitchen counter. Garden supplies, written in Elena's neat handwriting. Dante took it with him when he left for work. The supplies arrived 2 days later. Bags of soil, fertilizer, new gardening tools, seeds, starter plants. Elena was in the garden when the delivery truck pulled up. She watched through the window as 2 men unloaded everything onto the driveway, then disappeared inside without asking Dante about any of it. She found him that evening in his study, surrounded by paperwork. Thank you, she said from the doorway. Dante looked up. You're welcome. That was a lot of stuff. You had a long list. Elena shifted her weight, uncomfortable. I'll pay you back eventually. Don't, Dante. I mean it. Don't. He set down his pen. You're bringing that garden back to life. That's payment enough. She wanted to argue. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the tension in her shoulders. But instead, she just nodded and left. The garden became her project, her purpose. She worked on it every day, methodically clearing sections, amending soil, planning layouts. Dante would come home to find her kneeling in the dirt, her hands black with earth, her face flushed from exertion. She looked more alive out there than she did anywhere else. One evening, he came home to find her still working, even though the sun had set. He flipped on the outdoor lights and brought her a glass of water. It's almost 9, he said. Elena sat back on her heels, accepting the water. I know. I just wanted to finish this bed. It can wait until tomorrow. I know that, too. She drank deeply, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. But I like being out here. It's quiet. Dante understood that. The quiet, the escape. What are you planting? He asked. Tomatoes in this bed. Herbs in the next one. There's a spot in the back that gets good sun. I'm thinking roses there, but different varieties than what died. Something hardier. You've thought this through. It's all I think about. She said it lightly, but there was weight beneath the words. Dante crouched down beside her, examining the freshly turned soil. Why? Why does this matter so much to you? Elena was quiet for a moment, her fingers trailing through the dirt. Because it's something I can control, she said finally. Everything else in my life, Marco, the apartment, the money, the streets, it all just happened to me. I had no say. But this, she gestured to the garden, this is mine. I decide what grows here. I decide what lives. The rawness in her voice made Dante's chest tighten. Then you should keep going, he said quietly. Elena looked, really commit to it. Design the whole thing, make it yours. That would take months, maybe longer. So I'm not staying that long. Dante held her gaze. Why not? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. Because this isn't my home. It could be. No, it couldn't. Her voice was firm. This is temporary, a stopgap. The second I'm strong enough to stand on my own, I'm gone. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Somewhere. That's not a plan. It's more than I had a month ago. Elena stood, brushing dirt from her knees. I'm not your project, Dante, and I'm not your penance. I'm just someone passing through. She walked inside before he could respond. But the next morning, he found her in the garden again, planting tomatoes like she had all the time in the world. The pattern continued. They circled each other carefully, learning the rhythms of coexistence. Elena cooked dinner most nights, and Dante cleaned up. They ate together, but rarely talked about anything substantial. The conversation stayed surface level, safe. How was work? Fine. Yours. I don't work. Right. How was the garden? Good. It was cordial, polite, completely hollow. But underneath the pleasantries, tension simmered. There were things neither of them said, questions unasked, truths unspoken. They lived in the same house, but existed in separate worlds, until the day Elena found the library. She'd been looking for a book, anything to read before bed, and had wandered into a room she'd previously ignored. It was lined floor to ceiling with shelves packed tight with volumes. Histories, classics, contemporary fiction, philosophy, an entire wall dedicated to books. Elena ran her fingers along the spines, marveling. She pulled out a worn copy of Chekhov and flipped it open. Inside the front cover, written in faded ink, Marco Morelli, Columbia University, 2015. Her breath caught. She pulled out another book, same handwriting, and another, and another. This is Marco's collection. He loved that library. Elena spun around. Dante stood in the doorway, his jacket slung over one shoulder. "I didn't hear you come in," she said. "You were absorbed." He nodded toward the books. Marco spent every spare dollar he had on those. Said a man who didn't read was a man who didn't think. Elena looked back at the shelves, her throat tight. "Why did you keep them?" "Because they were his." "You could have donated them, sold them, given them away." "I could have." Dante stepped into the room. "But then I wouldn't have anything left of him except memories." Elena set the Chekhov down carefully, like it might break. "I didn't know he went to Columbia. Full scholarship, top of his class. He never told me that. He didn't like talking about it, said it made him sound pretentious." Elena laughed. A small, sad sound. That's exactly what he would say. They stood in silence, surrounded by ghosts. "You can read any of them," Dante said finally. "Take whatever you want to your room." "Thank you." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Elena." "Yeah, he loved you more than anything. I need you to know that." Elena's vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. "I know." Dante nodded and left her alone with the books. That night, Elena lay in bed reading Chekhov by lamplight, her fingers tracing words Marco had once read. She felt closer to him here in this house than she had in years. It was disorienting, wrong somehow, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. The days bled into weeks. The garden grew. Elena grew stronger, her body filling out, color returning to her cheeks. She looked less like a ghost and more like a person. But the house remained tense, charged with unspoken things. One evening, Dante came home to find Elena in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. She'd started doing that, reading in the common spaces instead of hiding upstairs. Small shift, but Dante noticed. "Good book?" he asked. "Tolstoy. So dense as hell, but yeah," he smiled, actually smiled. Elena stared at him. "What?" he asked. "I don't think I've ever seen you smile before." The expression faded. "I don't do it often." "Why not?" "Not much to smile about." Elena set the book down. "That's bleak. It's accurate." She studied him, her head tilted. "Do you ever do anything that isn't work?" "Not really." "That's sad. It's efficient. It's lonely." The word landed like a stone. Dante didn't argue. He just went to the kitchen and poured himself a drink. Elena followed him, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm not trying to pick a fight." "I know. I'm just saying this house is huge. You're here all alone. That can't be healthy. I'm not alone anymore. I don't count." "Why not?" "Because I'm temporary, remember." Dante took a sip of whiskey, not looking at her. "Right." Elena sighed. "Look, I'm not good at this small talk or whatever this is. But you've been decent to me, and I'm trying to be decent back. So I'm asking, are you okay? Why do you care? I don't know. Maybe I'm just bored." He glanced at her and she was almost smiling. "Almost. I'm fine," he said. "Liar." "Elena, you work 16-hour days, come home to an empty house, and drink alone in your kitchen. That's not fine. That's a coping mechanism. Since when did you become a therapist?" "Since I spent 6 months on the streets and learned to spot people who are barely holding it together." She crossed her arms. "You're surviving, Dante. Not living. There's a difference." He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't know what she was talking about. But the truth was she'd nailed it. "What do you want me to say?" he asked quietly. "I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to know I see you." The admission hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Dante set down his glass. "I see you too." Elena's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across her features before she shut it down. "Yeah, well, don't look too close. You might not like what you find." She left before he could respond. That night, Tay couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in his head. Elena's words echoed. "You're surviving, not living." She was right. He hadn't lived in 6 years. He just kept moving forward, one day at a time, building walls to keep the guilt out. But the walls hadn't worked. They just made him hollow. Around 2 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went downstairs. The light was on in the kitchen. Elena sat at the table in an oversized sweater drinking tea. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No. Want some." She gestured to the kettle. Dante hesitated, then nodded. He poured himself a cup and sat down across from her. They didn't talk. They just sat in the quiet, drinking tea, listening to the house settle around them. It felt almost peaceful. "Thank you," Dante said finally. "For what? For being honest earlier about the coping mechanism thing." Elena shrugged. "I've had a lot of time to think about survival versus living. Figured I'd share the wisdom." "Is that what you're doing now?" "Living." She considered the question seriously. "I'm trying. Some days are better than others." "Same." They fell back into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just there. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Depends on the question. Why didn't you come to the funeral? Really?" Dante's grip tightened on his mug. He'd known this question was coming eventually, had dreaded it. "Because I was a coward," he said finally. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." He met her eyes. "I couldn't face you, couldn't look at you and see what I'd done. So I stayed away and told myself it was better that way, that you'd heal faster without me around. That was stupid." "I know. I needed answers, Dante. I needed to know why he died, what happened, and you just disappeared. I'm sorry. Stop saying that." Her voice was sharp, angry. "Stop apologizing like it changes anything. What do you want me to do? I want you to tell me the truth." She slammed her mug down, tea sloshing over the rim. "I want you to stop hiding behind guilt and politeness and just be honest with me. What happened to Marco?" Dante felt his chest tighten. This was it, the moment he'd been avoiding. "He was taken," Dante said quietly, "by Vittorio's people. They wanted leverage, territory, product, connections, things I wasn't willing to give up. So you let them kill him." I called what I thought was a bluff. His voice was steady, controlled. I thought they'd negotiate, that they wouldn't actually go through with it because Marco was too valuable alive. But they did, yes. Elena's hands were shaking, and you just accepted it. "No. I tore that city apart looking for the people responsible. I made sure Vittorio paid, but it didn't bring Marco back. Revenge isn't the same as justice. I know." Dante's jaw was tight, but it's all I had. Elena stared at him, her eyes wet, her face pale. "You should have told me." "I know. You should have let me be part of it. Let me understand." "I know. Stop saying that." She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. Dante stood too, careful not to move toward her. "Elena, I can't do this right now." Her voice cracked. "I can't sit here and listen to you confess like it absolves you of anything. It doesn't. It just makes it worse." She left the kitchen, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. Dante stood alone, staring at the spilled tea spreading across the table, and wondered if he'd just destroyed the fragile peace they'd built. Upstairs, Elena pressed her back against the closed door of her room and finally let herself cry. Elena didn't come down the next morning or the morning after that. She stayed in her room with the door closed, emerging only when she knew Dante had left for work. She'd slip downstairs, grab food, and disappear again before he returned. The house felt colder without her presence in it. Dante didn't push. He left notes, short, practical things. "There's soup in the fridge. The garden could use watering. I'll be home late." She never responded, but the notes disappeared, so he knew she was reading them. On the fourth day, he came home to find the garden watered and weeded, but Elena was nowhere to be seen. He stood in the backyard looking at the neat rows she'd created, the small green shoots just beginning to emerge from the soil, and felt the weight of his own failure settle heavier on his shoulders. That night, he sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he didn't want, and the journal he shouldn't have kept. He flipped to the entry about Marco's death and read it again, searching for something he'd missed, some detail that would make it hurt less. There wasn't one. He'd made a choice, a calculated, strategic choice, and his brother had died because of it. The truth was simple and brutal, and no amount of rereading would change it. Dante closed the journal and locked it back in the safe. Then he went to bed and didn't sleep. The next morning, Elena was in the kitchen when he came downstairs. She stood at the counter, pouring coffee, her back to him, her shoulders tense. "Morning," Dante said carefully. "Morning." She didn't turn around. He grabbed his briefcase, preparing to leave without pushing for more. But Elena spoke before he reached the door. "I'm not avoiding you." Dante stopped. "Okay, I just needed time to think. I understand." She finally turned to face him, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Do you? Because I don't think you do. Then explain it to me." Elena set her coffee down with more force than necessary. "For 6 years, I thought Marco died because of random violence. Bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. That's what everyone told me. That's what I made myself believe. Because the alternative, that there was a reason, a choice, a person responsible, was too much to handle. Her voice cracked. And now I find out it wasn't random at all. That you knew. That you made a decision that got him killed. And I'm supposed to what? Just accept that. No. Then what am I supposed to do with this, Dante? How am I supposed to live in your house, eat your food, work in your garden, knowing what you did? I don't know. The admission was raw, honest. I don't have an answer for you, Elena laughed bitterly. Of course you don't. But I'll tell you this. Dante stepped closer, his voice low and steady. I'm not going to defend myself. I'm not going to justify what I did or try to make you see it from my perspective. What I did was wrong, period. And if you want to hate me for it, you should. You have every right. I already hate you. Good. They stared at each other across the kitchen, the air between them charged with anger and grief, and something else neither of them wanted to name. Then why are you still here? Dante asked quietly. Elena opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. She looked away, her hands gripping the counter. Because I have nowhere else to go. That's not true anymore. You're stronger now. You could leave, I know. So why don't you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena's knuckles were white against the darker granite. I don't know, she whispered finally. Dante nodded slowly. When you figure it out, tell me. He left before she could respond. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding, her thoughts a tangled mess. She wanted to leave. Should leave, pack her things, and walk out the door and never look back. But something kept her rooted in place. Maybe it was the garden. Maybe it was the books. Maybe it was the quiet comfort of having a roof over her head and food in her stomach. Or maybe, and this was the part that terrified her, it was Dante himself. Not because she forgave him, not because she understood him, but because being near him made the grief feel less lonely. Like she wasn't the only person carrying the weight of Marco's death. She hated that. Hated that she needed it, but she couldn't deny it either. That evening, Elena forced herself to come downstairs when Dante got home. She found him in the living room, tie loosened, reading through what looked like contracts. Can we talk? She asked from the doorway. He looked up, surprised. Of course. She sat down on the opposite end of the couch, keeping distance between them. I've been thinking about what you said about not defending yourself. Okay, and I realized something. She twisted her hands together. I don't want you to defend yourself, but I do want to understand. Not so I can forgive you. I'm not ready for that, and I might never be. But so I can stop imagining the worst possible version of what happened. Dante set the contracts aside. What do you want to know? Everything. Elena's voice was firm. I want to know exactly what happened, start to finish. No editing, no protecting me from the ugly parts. Just the truth. He studied her for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. Then he nodded. Okay, but not here. He stood. Come with me. Elena followed him upstairs to his study. He unlocked the safe and pulled out the journal, setting it on the desk between them. This is my private record, he said. Everything I couldn't say out loud, everything I need to process but couldn't share. He opened it to the section about Marco. It's not pretty, and it's going to hurt. I know. Are you sure you want this? Elena looked at the journal, then at Dante. Yes. He slid it across the desk to her. Read it, all of it. And when you're done, if you have questions, I'll answer them. She picked up the journal with shaking hands. The pages felt heavy, weighted with secrets. Dante moved toward the door. I'll give you privacy. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Stay. I want you here when I read it. He hesitated, then nodded and sat back down. Elena began to read. The entries were clinical at first. Dates, names, strategic decisions. But as she went deeper, the clinical tone cracked. She could see Dante's handwriting getting messier, more urgent. Could feel the pressure building through the words on the page. Vittorio's people took Marco from his apartment. Clean grab, no witnesses. They called 2 hours later with demands. Withdraw from the waterfront operations, hand over 3 key contacts, and pay $2 million in cash. The timeline was 72 hours. I consulted with my advisors. Everyone said the same thing. Give them what they want. Marco's life is worth more than territory. But if I fold, we're finished. Vittorio will know he can take anything from us just by grabbing the right person. The organization will fracture. Everything we've built will collapse. I made the call. Hold the line. Show strength. Force them to negotiate. It was the right strategic move. Elena's hands trembled as she turned the page. Day 2. No contact from Vittorio's people. My team is going insane trying to locate Marco. Nothing. It's like he vanished. I'm starting to think I miscalculated. Day 3. Still nothing. I sent word through back channels that I'm willing to negotiate. No response. Marco's deadline is in 6 hours. I'm not sleeping. Can't eat. I keep playing out scenarios in my head. What if I'm wrong? What if they actually do it? But I can't back down now. If I show weakness, we're all dead anyway. The next entry was dated 3 days later. They sent Marco back in pieces. Not literally, but close enough. He was dumped outside a warehouse in Red Hook, beaten so badly I barely recognized him. The coroner said he'd been dead for 24 hours, meaning they killed him on day 2, before I even started trying to negotiate. My gamble didn't matter. They were never going to let him live. But I'll never know for sure because I didn't try hard enough, didn't move fast enough. I chose the organization over my brother, and he paid for it. Elena's vision blurred. She kept reading through the tears. I told Elena's family the same lie I told everyone else. Wrong place, wrong time, random violence. Because the truth that Marco died as a pawn in a power play I refused to concede would destroy her. I went to the funeral but stayed in the back. Couldn't look at her. Couldn't face what I'd done. Afterward, I sent money. Tried to help from a distance. She sent it back every time. I took that as permission to forget. But I never forgot. I just pretended I did. The entries continued, detailing Dante's revenge against Vittorio's organization. The systematic dismantling of his operations, the violence, the finality. Vittorio died 3 months after Marco. His people scattered. I took everything he had and burned it to the ground. It didn't help. Nothing helps. Marco is still dead, and I still made the choice that killed him. Elena closed the journal carefully and set it down. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to make them stop. Dante sat across from her, perfectly still, watching her process everything. They were going to kill him anyway, she said finally, her voice hollow. Maybe you wrote it yourself. They killed him on day 2 before you even tried to negotiate. I did write that. Dante's voice was quiet, but I don't know if it's true. I told myself that to make it easier to live with, but the reality is I'll never know. Maybe if I'd moved faster or offered more, they would have kept him alive. Or maybe they always planned to kill him, and nothing I did would have mattered. He met her eyes. Either way, I made a choice that put him at risk, and he died because of it. Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold herself together. I don't know what to do with this. Neither do I. I'm so angry at you. You should be. But I'm also, she stopped, struggling to find the words. I'm also relieved because at least now I know. At least it's not this giant unknown thing eating me alive anymore. Dante didn't respond. He just sat there letting her work through it. Did you love him? Elena asked suddenly. Yes. Then how could you? Because I was arrogant. Dante's voice was flat, factual. I thought I was smarter than Vittorio. I thought I could outmaneuver him. That's not good enough. I know. Elena stood abruptly, pacing the small study. You keep saying I know like acknowledging it makes it okay, but it doesn't. It just means you understand you screwed up. That's not the same as, she broke off, her breath hitching. The same as what? Dante asked gently. The same as caring. The words exploded out of her. You're so calm about this. So controlled, like you're discussing a business deal that went bad. But this was your brother, my husband, a person who loved you, who trusted you, who died because you gambled with his life. You're right. Stop agreeing with me. She spun to face him. Fight back. Defend yourself. Get angry. Anything other than this empty acceptance. Dante stood slowly, and for the first time since she'd started reading, his composure cracked. You want me to get angry? Fine. I'm furious at myself, at Vittorio, at the entire situation. I wake up every morning wishing I could go back and make a different choice. I see Marco's face every time I close my eyes. I hear his voice in my head telling me I'm an idiot for choosing the business over him. And I know he's right. His voice rose. I destroyed my brother. I destroyed you. And I destroyed myself. All because I was too proud to admit I was wrong. Is that what you wanted to hear? Elena stared at him, her chest heaving. Yes. They stood across from each other, both breathing hard, the air between them electric. I can't stay here, Elena said finally. Dante's expression shuddered. I understand. No, you don't. She shook her head. I can't stay here and pretend this is normal, that we can just coexist and ignore the fact that you're responsible for the worst thing that ever happened to me. But I also, she stopped frustrated, I also don't want to leave. Not yet. Not like this. Then what do you want? I want time. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. I want to finish the garden. I want to keep reading Marco's books. I want to figure out who I am now that I know the truth. And then when I'm ready, I want to leave on my terms, not running away, not out of desperation, but because I chose to. Dante nodded slowly. Okay, that's it. Just okay. What else do you want me to say? I don't know. Maybe tell me I'm being unreasonable, or that I should just forgive you and move on, or literally anything other than just accepting whatever I decide. You get to decide, Elena, about all of it. When you stay, when you leave, whether you ever speak to me again after this. That's yours. I don't get a vote. She studied him, looking for cracks in the facade. Why? Because I took your choices away once before. His voice was quiet. When I didn't tell you the truth about Marco, when I let you think it was random instead of giving you the information you deserved, I won't do that again. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not even close, but maybe the smallest recognition that Dante was trying in his broken way to do right by her. I'm going to bed, she said finally. Okay. She walked to the door, then paused. Thank you for showing me the journal. You deserve the truth. Yeah, she looked back at him. I did. She left him alone in the study, with the journal still open on the desk. The next morning, things were different. Not better exactly, but clearer. Elena came downstairs to find Dante making breakfast, or attempting to. He stood at the stove with a spatula, scowling at scrambled eggs that were definitely burning. You're going to set off the smoke alarm, she said. He looked up, startled. I thought you were still asleep. I was. The smell woke me up. She crossed to the stove and took the spatula from his hand. Move. Dante stepped aside, watching as she salvaged what she could of the eggs and started fresh with a new pan. I don't usually cook, he said. I noticed. I thought you might be hungry. Elena glanced at him, surprised. That's thoughtful. Don't sound so shocked. A small smile tugged at her lips despite everything. Can you hand me the salt? They worked in tandem. Elena cooking, Dante following her quiet instructions. It should have been awkward, should have been tense, but somehow it wasn't. When the food was ready, they sat at the kitchen table and ate in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Less hostile, more thoughtful. I'm going to work on the rose bed today, Elena said eventually. Do you need help? She considered the offer. Actually, yeah. The soil needs to be turned pretty deep, and my back is still not great. I'll help after work. You don't have to. I know. I want to. Elena nodded, accepting it. That evening, Dante came home to find Elena already in the garden, marking out the area where the roses would go. He changed into jeans and a t-shirt, clothes Elena had never seen him in, and joined her. Tell me what to do, he said. She handed him a shovel. Start turning the soil about a foot deep. I'll work on amending it as you go. They worked side by side as the sun set, their movements synchronized. Dante dug while Elena added compost and fertilizer, mixing it into the earth. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence was comfortable. When it got too dark to see, they sat on the back steps, both dirty and exhausted. Thank you, I said. You already thanked me for the supplies. Not for that. For this, she gestured to the garden. For helping, for not making it weird. It is weird. Yeah, but you're not making it weirder. Dante almost smiled. Low bar. It's the bar I've got. They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the city sounds in the distance. Can I ask you something? Dante said. Depends. What happened to you after Marco died? How did you end up? He trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. On the streets. Elena's voice was matter of fact. It wasn't one thing. It was 100 small disasters that added up. She picked at the dirt under her fingernails. I lost my job at the gallery first. Couldn't focus. Kept missing work. Then I couldn't pay rent. Marco's life insurance got tied up in legal nonsense because of how he died. His family blamed me somehow. Said I should have kept him away from you. They cut me off completely. I didn't know that. Why would you? You weren't there. There was no accusation in her voice. Just fact. I couch surfed for a while, stayed with friends until I wore out my welcome. Tried to get back on my feet, but everything required an address I didn't have, or references I couldn't provide, or a version of myself that didn't exist anymore. She paused. Eventually, I just ran out of options and people and hope. Dante's jaw was tight. I'm sorry. I know you are, but sorry doesn't change the past 6 years. No, it doesn't. Elena stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. I'm going to shower. Okay. She made it to the door before she spoke again. Dante, yeah, I'm glad we talked about Marco, about all of it. I'm still angry, still hurt, but at least now I understand. That's something. Yeah. She looked back at him. It is. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. They worked on the garden together most evenings, transforming the neglected space into something alive. Elena planned the layouts while Dante provided the labor. Digging, hauling, building, raised beds according to her specifications. During the day, while Dante was at work, Elena continued restoring the space on her own. But she also started leaving the house. Short trips at first, to the hardware store for supplies, to the library for more books, then longer ones. She'd walk through neighborhoods she used to know, watching the city like a stranger trying to remember a language she'd once spoken fluently. One day, she came home with a notebook. "What's that?" Dante asked when he saw her writing in it that evening. Plans. She showed him pages filled with sketches and notes for the garden. "I've been thinking about next season, what we could plant, how to rotate crops, which perennials would work best." "Next season," Dante repeated. "So, you're staying." Elena's pen stilled. "I don't know yet, but if I am, I want to do this right." He nodded, not pushing for more, but something had shifted. The way Elena moved through the house, the way she talked about future plans, it suggested permanence, even if she wouldn't admit it. And Dante found himself hoping, despite everything, that she would stay. Late one night, Elena found herself unable to sleep again. She went downstairs and found Dante in his study working through paperwork, even though it was past midnight. "You're up late," she said from the doorway. He looked up. "So are you. Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." She leaned against the doorframe. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever regret it?" "Not just what happened to Marco, but the whole thing. The business, the choices, the life." Dante set down his pen. "Every day." "Then why do you keep doing it?" "Because I don't know how to do anything else." He met her eyes. "This is all I've ever been. Take it away, and I'm not sure what's left." "That's sad." "It's honest." Elena crossed to the desk and sat in the chair opposite him. "What did you want to be before all this?" "I don't remember. I was 19 when my father died and left me the business. Didn't have much time to think about alternatives. Marco said you used to draw." Dante blinked surprised. "He told you that?" "Yeah. Said you were good at it. Architecture, cityscapes, things like that. I haven't drawn in 20 years. Maybe you should start again." "Why?" "Because you said it yourself. You're surviving, not living. Maybe it's time to figure out what living actually looks like." Dante studied her, something shifting in his expression. "When did you get so wise?" "When I spent 6 months with nothing but time to think." She stood. "Anyway, I'll let you get back to work." "Elena." "Yeah. Thank you for still talking to me after everything." She paused at the door. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me because holding on to all that anger was killing me. I'll take it." She almost smiled. "Yeah, you will." The next evening, Dante came home with a sketchbook and a set of pencils. He didn't mention it, just left them on his desk. But Elena noticed, and she noticed over the following weeks that he started staying up later in his study. And when she peeked in one night, she saw him bent over the sketchbook, his hand moving across the page with a focus she'd never seen before. She didn't interrupt, just smiled to herself and went to bed. Something between them was changing, not healing. That would take more time if it happened at all, but evolving. They were learning to exist in the same space without constantly colliding, learning that grief could be shared without being solved, that anger and understanding could coexist. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first step towards something that might eventually become peace. And for now, that was enough. The roses came in mid-spring, bare root and fragile looking in their packaging. Elena handled them like they might shatter, soaking the roots in water while she prepared the bed she and Dante had spent weeks building. He watched from the back steps, sketchpad balanced on his knee, drawing the garden as it was now, half finished, caught between ruin and restoration. "You're not going to help," Elena called over her shoulder. "You told me I plant things too deep, because you do, so I'm observing." She rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. The truth was, they'd fallen into roles that worked. Elena as the architect and lead gardener, Dante as the muscle and supply runner. It was easier than discussing what they actually were to each other now. Elena settled the first rose into the ground, packing soil around its roots with careful hands. "My mom used to say roses were temperamental, that they'd die just to spite you if you didn't treat them right. Sounds like something Marco would have said about you." She froze, then barked out a laugh, sharp and surprised. "Excuse me. He said you were the most stubborn person he'd ever met. That once you decided something, there was no talking you out of it. Elena sat back on her heels, dirt streaking her arms. He told you that constantly, usually right after you'd win an argument. I didn't win arguments, I was just right. That's what winning is. She smiled despite herself, then caught the expression and tried to hide it. But Dante had already seen it, and something in his chest loosened. These moments were coming more frequently now. Brief glimpses of the woman Marco had fallen in love with, emerging from underneath all the survival and anger. Dante found himself looking for them, waiting for the next time Elena would forget to be guarded. What else did he say about me? Elena asked, returning to the rose planting, but keeping her voice casual. Dante flipped back through his memory, sorting through years of his brother's rambling about the woman who'd completely upended his world. He said you laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. That you read 3 books at once and got them all mixed up. That you cried at movies but pretended you didn't. I don't cry at movies, he said. You sat through the end of some film about a dog. That's different. The dog died. Exactly. Elena planted the second rose with more force than necessary, but she was smiling. What else? That you were terrifying when you were angry. That you made the best carbonara he'd ever had. That you hummed while you cooked. Always the same song and never realized you were doing it. She stopped moving. What song? He never told me. Said it drove him crazy trying to figure it out. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hands still in the soil. When she spoke, her voice was soft. It was something my mom used to sing. I don't even remember the words anymore, just the melody. Dante didn't respond. Just let the memory sit between them. They worked in companionable silence until all 6 roses were planted. Elena stood and surveyed her work, hands on her hips, dirt smudged across her cheek. They look good, Dante said. They look half dead. They'll grow. Maybe. She wiped her face, making the dirt streak worse. If they don't, we'll try again next year. Next year. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Neither of them acknowledged it. That night, Elena was pulling books from Marco's library when she noticed one tucked behind the others. A small leather journal, different from the others. She pulled it out and opened it to find Marco's handwriting, younger and messier than she remembered. Her heart stopped. This wasn't Dante's journal. This was Marco's. She sat down right there on the floor and started reading. The entries were scattered, irregular thoughts and observations from Marco's early 20s. Dreams about law school, complaints about family pressure, sketches of buildings he wanted to design someday. And then about halfway through, a new theme emerged. Met someone today. Gallery opening in Soho. She wore this red dress and spent 20 minutes arguing with some pretentious guy about Rothko. She was completely right and he was completely wrong. And watching her dismantle his argument was the most attractive thing I've ever seen. I didn't even get her name. Elena's breath caught. She kept reading, found out her name. Elena Whitmore works at the gallery. Went back 3 times this week, pretending to be interested in art. Pretty sure she knows I'm full of it, but she keeps talking to me anyway. I'm in trouble. The entries continued, documenting their entire relationship from Marco's perspective. His nervousness before their first real date, his certainty just 6 weeks in that he was going to marry her, his terror when he introduced her to Dante and his brother just stared at her without saying a word for a full minute. Dante finally told me what he thought about Elena. He said she's too good for you, don't screw it up. Then he walked away. High praise from my brother. Elena laughed through tears, her hand pressed to her mouth. There were entries about the proposal, about the wedding planning, about the apartment they'd moved into together. And then the entries changed tone. Dante asked me to stay in the business. Said he needed someone he could trust, someone smart. I told him I wanted out, that Elena and I were planning a different life. He said the family needed me, that I was the only one who understood both sides, the legacy and the future. I said I'd think about it. Elena's going to kill me. She turned the page with shaking hands. Told Elena I was staying. She didn't yell, which was somehow worse. Just got very quiet and asked if I was sure. I'm not sure. But Dante is right. Someone needs to push this organization towards something better. And if not me, then who? She said, okay. Said she'd support whatever I decided. I don't deserve her. The entries became darker after that. Marco documenting the slow realization that Dante's promises about reform were just that, promises, that the business was what it was. And one person couldn't change it from the inside. I want to leave. Should have left a year ago. But Dante needs me, and I can't just abandon him. He's my brother. Elena deserves better than this. Better than me. The final entry was dated 3 days before he died. Something's wrong. Dante's been tense all week. Won't tell me why. I pushed him on it tonight, and he told me to trust him, to stay close to home until things settle down. I should listen. But Elena and I are supposed to have dinner with her friend tomorrow, and I don't want to cancel. She's been so patient with all the chaos. I owe her normal. One dinner won't hurt. The journal ended there. Elena sat on the floor of the library, the journal in her lap, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Because now she knew Marco had died going to a dinner she'd wanted. Died trying to give her a few hours of normal in a life that had stopped being normal the moment he agreed to stay in Dante's world. She'd spent 6 years blaming Dante for Marco's death, and she'd been right to. But Marco had made choices too, had chosen to stay when he could have left, had chosen loyalty to his brother over safety. It didn't excuse what Dante had done. Nothing could, but it complicated the story Elena had been telling herself. She didn't know how long she sat there. Eventually, she heard footsteps. Elena, Dante's voice came from the hallway. "You okay?" I heard. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her, his expression shifting from concern to understanding the moment he noticed the journal in her hands. "You didn't know about this," Elena said. It wasn't a question. No. Dante's voice was rough. I didn't even know he kept one. He wanted to leave the business. You all of it. I know. You knew. Not from the journal, but yeah, I knew. He told me a dozen times. Dante leaned against the doorframe like he needed the support. And I convinced him to stay every single time. Told him I needed him, that he was making a difference, that things would get better. He closed his eyes. I lied to keep him close and it got him killed. Elena stood on shaky legs, still clutching the journal. He chose to stay, Dante. You didn't force him. I manipulated him. You asked him to stay. That's not the same thing, is it? No. Elena's voice was firm. Marco was a grown man. He made his own choices. Bad choices, maybe. Choices I wish he hadn't made, but they were his. Dante stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. Why are you defending me? I'm not defending you. I'm just... She stopped, trying to find the right words. I spent 6 years thinking Marco's death was meaningless, random, and then I found out it wasn't. And I thought that made it your fault. Simple, clean, one person to blame. She held up the journal. But this makes it messy, makes it complicated. And I hate that. I want it to be simple. Want to be able to point at you and say you did this. And have that be the whole story. It is the whole story. No, it's not. She crossed to where he stood, stopping just in front of him. Marco chose to stay in your world, chose to ignore the warning signs, chose to go to that dinner, even when you told him to stay home. You made terrible decisions, and those decisions created the circumstances that killed him. But he made choices, too. And I can't ignore that just because it's easier to blame you for everything. Dante's jaw worked, his eyes searching her face. What are you saying? I'm saying the truth is more complicated than I wanted it to be, and I don't know what to do with that. They stood in the silence of the library, surrounded by Marco's books and dreams, and the ghost of who he'd wanted to be. Can I see it? Dante asked quietly, nodding toward the journal. Elena hesitated, then handed it to him. He opened it carefully, reading the entry about their first meeting. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped him. He went to that gallery 4 times, not 3. I know because he borrowed money from me for the subway. He told me he was there because he loved art. Marco thought Rothko was boring red squares, his words. Elena huffed out something between a laugh and a sob. I knew he was lying. He got this look on his face whenever he was full of it, like he was trying not to smile. He had that look constantly around you. They stood close now, passing the journal back and forth, reading passages aloud, filling in the gaps in each other's memories. The anger that had defined their relationship for months seemed to dissolve in the face of shared grief, replaced by something neither of them had expected. Connection. I miss him, Elena whispered. Me too. Do you think he'd hate us for this? Dante knew what she meant by this. Not the house or the garden or the careful peace they'd built, but the fact that they were here together, moving forward while Marco stayed frozen in the past. No, Dante said finally. He'd want you safe, happy, and if that meant making peace with me, he'd understand. I'm not happy. Not yet. But you could be. Elena looked up at him, really looked, and saw something in his face she hadn't noticed before. Not just guilt or regret, but hope. Fragile and uncertain, but there. It terrified her. I need air, she said abruptly, handing him the journal and walking out of the library. She went to the garden because that's where she always went when the world felt too big. The roses were settling in, their leaves unfurling, despite the trauma of transplanting. She knelt beside them, running her fingers over the new growth. She heard Dante follow her out, but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have. You didn't do anything wrong? Elena kept her eyes on the roses. I just needed a minute. Okay. But he didn't leave. He sat down on the steps, giving her space, but staying close enough that she knew he was there. After a while, Elena spoke. When I was on the streets, I used to imagine what I'd say to you if I ever saw you again. The speech I'd give, all the ways I'd make you understand what you'd done to me. She pulled a weed that had sprouted near the roses. And now I've said most of it, and you've heard it, and somehow I still don't feel better. What do you feel? Tired. She sat back. Just really, really tired of being angry. So stop. It's not that simple. Why not? Elena turned to look at him. Because if I stop being angry at you, then I have to figure out what comes next. And I don't know what that is. Dante stood and walked over to her, offering his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. We'll figure it out, he said. We, if you want. Elena studied his face, looking for manipulation or ulterior motives. But all she saw was sincerity. Broken, imperfect sincerity from a man who'd spent years building walls around himself and was now trying to tear them down. Okay, she said finally. We'll figure it out. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure, but it was something. And that would have to be enough. The next few weeks brought a shift in the house. The tension that had colored every interaction began to ease, replaced by something that almost felt like friendship. They fell into routines, cooking together, working on the garden, reading in companionable silence. Elena started joining Dante in his study some evenings, working on her garden plans while he sketched. What are you drawing? She asked one night, looking up from her notebook. Dante angled the pad so she could see. It was the garden rendered in precise detail, but not as it was. As it would be when finished. Roses in full bloom, vegetables thriving, pathways lined with herbs. That's beautiful, Elena said softly. It's optimistic. Same thing. He set the sketch aside. I've been thinking about something dangerous. He almost smiled. I want to make some changes to the business. Elena's expression became guarded. What kind of changes? Legitimate ones. Marco was right. I've been running this organization the same way for 20 years, telling myself it's necessary, but it's not. It's just easier than doing the hard work of transitioning to something legal. And you want to transition now. I want to try. He met her eyes. You were right when you said I was surviving instead of living. And I'm tired of it. Tired of the violence and the looking over my shoulder and the knowledge that everything I've built is one bad decision away from collapse. That's a big change. I know. Why now? Dante was quiet for a moment. Because you're here, and every day you stay is a reminder that there are other ways to exist, better ways. And I want to try to build something that doesn't require me to be someone Marco would have been ashamed of. Elena's throat tightened. He wasn't ashamed of you. He should have been, maybe, but he wasn't. He loved you even when he hated what you did. That was in the journal too. Dante looked down at his hands. I don't know if I can do it. Make this work, but I want to try. Then try, Elena said simply. And if it doesn't work, at least you'll know. Will you help me? She blinked, surprised. How could I possibly help you with this? You see things clearly without all the justifications and rationalizations I've built up. I need that perspective. Elena wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him this wasn't her problem, that she'd already given him too much. But looking at him now, vulnerable and uncertain in a way she'd never seen, she found she couldn't. Okay, she said. But I'm not making any promises. If I think you're bullshitting yourself, I'll tell you. I wouldn't want it any other way. They started the next day. Dante brought her into his world. Not the violence or the danger, but the business side. The contracts, the operations, the web of legitimate and illegitimate enterprises that made up his organization. Elena sat through meetings with lawyers and accountants, asking questions that made everyone uncomfortable. Why do you need 3 shell companies for one warehouse? What exactly does this consulting fee pay for? If this is a legitimate security firm, why doesn't it file taxes? Dante watched her dismantle his carefully constructed justifications with something like pride. She was relentless, unimpressed by smoke and mirrors, demanding actual answers instead of corporate doublespeak. You're making my lawyers nervous. he told her, after one particularly brutal meeting. Your lawyers should be nervous. Half of what they showed me today was barely legal. That's the point. No, the point is to transition to actual legitimate business. Barely legal isn't legitimate. Dante sighed, but he didn't argue because she was right, and they both knew it. The work was exhausting and complicated. Every step forward revealed 10 new problems. But slowly, painfully, they started making progress. Dante began shutting down the most obviously criminal operations, started renegotiating contracts, started building something that might eventually be clean. And through it all, Elena was there. Not as his employee or his project, but as something harder to define. A partner, maybe. Or just someone who refused to let him take the easy way out. One evening, months into the process, they sat in the garden watching the sunset. The roses had bloomed, deep reds and soft pinks, exactly as Elena had planned. The vegetables were producing. The whole space had transformed from ruin into something alive and beautiful. We did this, Elena said, looking around. You did this, Dante corrected. I just dug where you told me to. That's still helping, if you say so. She turned to look at him. I do say so. And I'm right because you're always right. Exactly. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the city, sounds filtering through the brownstone's high walls. I think I'm ready, Elena said quietly. Dante's chest tightened. He'd known this was coming, had been dreading it. Ready for what, to leave? She said it gently, like she was trying to soften a blow. Not today, but soon. I've been thinking about it for a while now, and I think it's time. Where will you go? I found a job at a bookstore in Park Slope. It doesn't pay much, but it's enough for a small apartment. I've been saving what you've been giving me for groceries and supplies. I didn't give you that money so you could save it for rent somewhere else. I know, but I did anyway. She turned to face him fully. I can't stay here forever, Dante. This was always temporary. We both knew that. I know. His voice was rough. I just thought. What? That she might stay. That they might keep building something together. That the fragile piece they'd created might become permanent. But he didn't say any of that because she was right. This had always been temporary. Nothing, he said finally. When? 2 weeks. I want to finish the fall planting first. Make sure everything is established before winter. Okay. Elena reached over and took his hand. The gesture surprised both of them, but neither pulled away. This doesn't mean I'm cutting you out, she said. I'm not disappearing. I just need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own, that I'm not just surviving on your charity. It's not charity. I know, but it feels like it sometimes. And I need to know I can do this myself. Dante squeezed her hand once, then let go. I understand. They sat together as the light faded, both knowing that something was ending, but neither of them quite ready to name what they were losing. The next 2 weeks passed too quickly. Elena finished the planting, organized the garden for winter, and packed her few belongings. Dante helped her look at apartments, co-signed the lease because she didn't have credit, and arranged for his moving company to help, even though she only owned 2 boxes of stuff. This is too much, Elena protested when the movers showed up. It's a truck and 2 guys for an hour. It's not too much, Dante. Elena. He looked at her seriously. Let me help, please. She relented because arguing seemed pointless. The apartment was small, a studio in a converted brownstone 4th floor walk-up, but it had good light and a window that overlooked a community garden. Elena stood in the empty space and felt something like hope. It's perfect, she said. Dante nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They brought up her boxes, and then the movers left, and it was just the 2 of them in the tiny apartment. Thank you, Elena said, for everything. The house, the garden, the job references, all of it. You don't have to thank me. I do, though, because whatever else happened between us, you saved my life, and I need you to know I'm grateful for that. Dante shook his head. You saved yourself. I just gave you space to do it. That's not true. It is. He stepped closer. You're the strongest person I know, Elena. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you're still here, still fighting, still trying to build something good. That's all you, not me. Elena's eyes were wet. Why are you saying this now? Because I need you to know it before you go. Need you to understand that whatever happens next, you're going to be okay. Better than okay. She crossed the space between them and hugged him. It was brief and awkward, but real. Take care of the garden, she said when she pulled back. I will, and yourself. I'll try. She smiled through tears. That's all any of us can do. Dante left because staying would have made it harder. He went home to a house that felt too big and too empty. He went to the garden and looked at the roses Elena had planted, now thriving despite everything, and he let himself grieve what he'd lost. The bookstore was called Second Chapter, which Elena found almost too on the nose to bear. But the owner, a woman named Ruth with silver hair and kind eyes, didn't ask questions about the gaps in her resume, or why someone with a degree in art history had been unemployed for 6 years. She just handed Elena an apron and showed her how to work the register. The work was simple: shelving books, helping customers, running the small cafe counter during lunch rush. Elena threw herself into it with the same intensity she'd brought to the garden. Learning the inventory system, memorizing which regulars liked which genres, perfecting the foam on cappuccinos. It felt good to be useful again, to earn money that was hers, to fall into bed exhausted from honest work instead of from the weight of everything she'd survived. But the apartment was quiet at night, too quiet. She'd gotten used to the sounds of Dante's house. His footsteps on the stairs, the clink of glasses in the kitchen, the scratch of pencil on paper when he stayed up late sketching. Now there was just the hum of her neighbor's television through the wall and the occasional siren in the distance. Elena told herself this was what she'd wanted: independence, proof that she could stand on her own. Most days she even believed it. 3 weeks after she moved out, her phone rang. Dante's name on the screen made her stomach flip in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. "Hello, the roses are dying," Elena sat up straighter. "What do you mean, dying? The leaves are turning brown, dropping off. I've been watering them like you said, but something's wrong. Did you check for beetles?" "I checked. No beetles. What about the soil? Is it draining properly?" "I don't know. How do I tell?" Elena closed her eyes, torn between exasperation and something warmer. "I'll come look at it." "You don't have to. I'm coming tomorrow afternoon. I'll take the train after work." There was a pause on the other end, then quietly, "Thank you." She told herself she was going for the roses, that she'd spent too much time on that garden to let it die from neglect, that it had nothing to do with the fact that she missed the house, or the work, or the man who lived there. The next day, Elena left the bookstore at 3 and took the subway to Dante's neighborhood. Walking up to the brownstone felt surreal, like visiting a place from a dream. She knocked instead of using her key, which was still buried at the bottom of her purse. Dante answered, looking like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed. For a man who usually looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, the disorder was startling. "You look terrible," Elena said. "Thanks. Come in." The house was messier than she'd ever seen it. Papers scattered across the dining table, dishes in the sink, his suit jacket thrown over a chair. Dante caught her looking and had the grace to seem embarrassed. "I've been busy. I can see that." They went to the garden and Elena knelt beside the roses, examining the browning leaves with careful fingers. After a few minutes, she sat back. "You're overwatering." "What? You said to water them regularly." "I said to water them when the soil is dry, not every single day." She pointed to the base of the plants. "See how the soil's staying wet? The roots are drowning." Dante crouched beside her, looking at the damage he'd inadvertently caused. "Can they be saved?" "Maybe. We need to cut back the dead growth, add some drainage material, and let them dry out. They might recover." Elena glanced at him. "I'm here. Might as well fix it properly." They spent the next 2 hours working on the roses, falling back into the rhythm they'd established over months of gardening together. Elena directed while Dante followed orders, pruning where she pointed, mixing amendments into the soil according to her specifications. "You've let the rest of it go, too," she observed, looking at the vegetable beds. "I told you I'm not good at this. You were doing fine before I left." "That's because you were here telling me what to do." Elena pulled a weed, then another. "You need to stay on top of it. Fall planting should have been done 2 weeks ago." "I know, Dante stopped, frustrated. "I don't know what I'm doing without you here." The admission hung between them, heavier than it should have been. "The garden's not that complicated," Elena said, keeping her voice light. "I'm not talking about the garden." She looked at him, then really looked, and saw exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "What's going on, Dante?" He sat back on the steps, dirt on his hands, defeat in his posture. "The transition isn't working. Every time I try to close down one operation, 3 more problems pop up. People are pushing back. My own advisors think I'm losing my mind. And maybe I am, because I'm dismantling everything I spent 20 years building. and I don't even know if what I'm building instead will survive. Elena abandoned the roses and sat beside him. Why are you still trying? Because I told you I would. That's not good enough. You can't rebuild your entire life just because you made a promise to someone. Why not? Because the second it gets hard, and it clearly is hard, you'll resent me for it. Resent yourself for trying, and then you'll go back to the old way because it's easier. Dante turned to look at her. Is that what you think I'm doing? Isn't it? No. His voice was firm. I'm doing this because for the first time in 20 years, I can see a different path. And yeah, it's hard. And yeah, I'm probably going to fail. But I'd rather fail trying to build something decent than succeed at something that would have made Marco ashamed. Elena felt her throat tighten. He wouldn't have been ashamed of you. We both know that's not true. No, we don't. She shifted to face him. Marco loved you, Dante. Even when he hated the business, even when he wanted out, he loved you, and he believed you were capable of better. That's why he stayed. Not because you manipulated him, but because he had faith that you'd eventually figure it out. I'm not sure I deserve that faith. Probably not, but you have it anyway from him. And she stopped, the words catching. And for me too, apparently. Dante stared at her like she just admitted something impossible. Elena, don't make it weird. I'm just saying I think you're actually trying, and I respect that, even if I still think you're an idiot most of the time. He huffed out something close to a laugh. Most of the time. Okay. All of the time. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension easing into something more familiar. I miss this, Dante said quietly. Having you here, working on the garden together, the arguments at dinner, all of it. I miss it too, Elena admitted, but I needed to leave, needed to prove I could survive on my own. And have you proved it? She considered the question honestly. I'm getting there. The job's good. The apartment's mine. I'm building something that doesn't depend on anyone else's charity. That's not what this was. I know, but it felt like it sometimes. Dante nodded, accepting it. Will you come back? Not to stay. Just a visit. Help me not kill the garden. Elena smiled despite herself. Yeah, I can do that. She came back the following week, and the week after that, always with the excuse of checking on the garden, though they both knew it was more than that. They'd fall into easy conversation while working, updating each other on their lives like old friends. Dante told her about the business, the progress and setbacks, the people who were resisting change, the small victories that felt massive. Elena told him about the bookstore, the regular customers she'd started recognizing, the weird questions people asked. Someone came in yesterday looking for a book about time-traveling cats, she said one evening, deadheading roses while Dante weeded. Did you find it, shockingly? Yes, we had 3. Why would anyone write one book about time-traveling cats, let alone 3? That's what I said. Ruth just laughed and told me I hadn't worked in books long enough. They settled into this new pattern, separate lives that intersected weekly in the garden. It was comfortable, safe, and if Elena sometimes caught herself wishing she could stay longer, or if Dante's house felt a little less empty on the days she visited, neither of them mentioned it. 2 months after Elena left, everything changed. She got the call at work. Dante's name on her phone in the middle of her shift, which never happened unless something was wrong. I need you, he said without preamble. Elena stepped away from the register. What happened? There's a problem, a big one. Can you come over? I'm at work until 6. Please. The word raw and desperate made her stomach drop. I'll be there in an hour. She told Ruth there was an emergency and caught the next train. Her mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. By the time she reached the brownstone, she'd convinced herself someone was dead. But when Dante opened the door, he was alone and alive and pacing. What's going on? Elena demanded. I got an offer today. For what? For everything. The whole organization. A buyer who wants to take it all. The legitimate businesses, the contracts, the properties, all of it. Elena blinked. That's good, isn't it? That's what you wanted. That's what I thought I wanted. But now that it's real, He stopped, running his hands through his hair. I'm terrified. Of what? Of what comes after? I've been running this organization since I was 19. It's all I know, all I am. If I sell it, what's left? Elena crossed to where he stood and grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. You're left, Dante. Just you. Not the business, or the reputation, or the legacy. Just who you are, without all of that. I don't know who that is. Then it's time to find out. He searched her face, looking for certainty she wasn't sure she had. What if I hate it? What if I sell everything and realize I made a massive mistake? Then you'll deal with it like you've dealt with everything else. She softened her grip. But you can't keep living half in and half out. Either commit to the change or don't, but stop torturing yourself. Dante pulled away, walking to the window. The buyer wants an answer by Friday. That's 3 days. I know. What do you want to do? He was quiet for a long time then. I want to sell. I want to walk away from all of it and build something new, something clean. He turned to face her, but I'm scared I'll lose myself in the process. You won't. How do you know? Because I've watched you change over the past year. Watched you go from someone who couldn't admit he was wrong to someone who's actively trying to do better. That doesn't disappear just because the circumstances change. Dante moved closer, his expression intense. Stay with me while I figure this out. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. Dante, not in the house. I'm not asking you to give up your apartment or your independence. Just be here. Help me through this because I don't think I can do it alone. Elena wanted to say no. Wanted to protect the boundaries she'd worked so hard to establish. But looking at him now, vulnerable and uncertain, and trying so damn hard to be better, she couldn't. Okay, she said, but just until you make the decision. After that, you're on your own. Relief flooded his features. Thank you. They spent the next 3 days working through everything. Elena sat with Dante and his lawyers, asking the same uncomfortable questions she'd asked before, making sure the deal was actually what it appeared to be. She pushed him to think through consequences, to plan for contingencies, to consider what he'd do with his life after. You could go back to school, she suggested one night over takeout. Finish that architecture degree Marco said you wanted. I'm too old for school. You're 43, not dead still. Or you could travel, see the places you've only read about. Alone. The question caught her off guard. I mean, you could find people to go with. Like who? I don't know. Friends, family. She paused. Me, if you wanted. Dante looked up sharply. You'd come with me, I said, if you wanted, hypothetically. I'm not making promises. But something in her chest warmed at the idea. Traveling with Dante, seeing him somewhere other than this house, this city, this life. Being together without all the weight of history crushing down on them. I'd like that, Dante said quietly, hypothetically. On Friday, Dante signed the papers. He sold everything. The operations, the properties, the remnants of an empire he'd spent 2 decades building. And when it was done, he walked out of the lawyer's office and stood on the street looking lost. Elena was waiting for him outside. She'd taken the day off work, told Ruth she needed to be there for a friend. Now, she watched Dante emerge from the building looking like a man who'd just jumped off a cliff and wasn't sure if the parachute would open. How do you feel? She asked. I have no idea. That's probably normal. Is it? I don't know. I've never sold a criminal empire before. He huffed out a laugh, and some of the tension left his shoulders. What do I do now? Whatever you want. I don't know what I want. Elena stepped closer and took his hand. Then let's start small. What do you want for lunch? He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. I want to go home to the garden. I want to sit in the space we built together and just breathe. Okay, let's do that. They took a cab back to the brownstone, and Dante changed out of his suit into jeans and a t-shirt. They sat in the garden while the afternoon light filtered through the trees, neither of them speaking, just existing in the space they'd created together. I'm terrified, Dante said finally. I know, but I also feel lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long. I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. That's good. That's really good. Will you stay? Not just today, but longer. Help me figure out what comes next. She should have said no. Should have maintained her independence, protected her hard-won boundaries. But sitting here with him in this garden they'd built from ruins, Elena realized something. She didn't want to leave. Yeah, she said softly. I'll stay. The transition wasn't smooth. Dante struggled with purpose, with identity, with what to do with days that stretched empty before him. He threw himself into the garden with almost manic intensity, expanding beds, adding features, planning elaborate projects that would take years to complete. Elena watched him carefully, making sure the restlessness didn't turn into something darker. She encouraged him to sketch more, to take walks, to explore the city like a tourist, instead of someone who owned pieces of it. You need hobbies, she told him one morning. I have the garden. That's not a hobby. That's an obsession. You need something else. Like what? I don't know. Cooking classes, photography, underwater basket weaving. That's not a real thing. My point stands. Dante ended up taking a drawing class at a community center, which Elena found hilarious until she saw his work. He had real talent. Marco had been right about that. His sketches of the city were precise, but not cold, capturing the energy of New York in a way that felt alive. These are good, Elena said, looking through his sketchbook one evening. They're adequate. Stop fishing for compliments. They're good, and you know it. He smiled, almost shy. The teacher wants me to show some pieces in a student exhibition next month. You should do it. It seems self-indulgent. It's art, Dante. It's supposed to be self-indulgent. He included 3 pieces in the show, and Elena dragged Ruth and half the bookstore staff to the opening. Watching Dante talk to strangers about his work, nervous and earnest and so different from the controlled crime boss he'd been, made something in Elena's chest expand. This was who he was underneath everything else. Someone creative and thoughtful and capable of growth. She found herself falling for this version of him. Not despite the past, but with full awareness of it. Knowing what he'd done, what he'd cost her, and choosing him anyway, it terrified her. One night, 6 months after Dante sold the business, they were working in the garden when it started to rain. Not the gentle kind, but the sudden Brooklyn downpour that came out of nowhere and soaked everything instantly. Inside, Elena shouted, laughing as she ran for the door. But Dante didn't follow. He stood in the rain, head tilted back, letting it wash over him. Elena stopped on the steps, watching him. What are you doing? I don't know. He opened his eyes and looked at her, feeling alive. She should have gone inside. Should have left him to his moment, but instead, she walked back into the rain and stood beside him. You're insane, she said. Probably. They stood there getting soaked, and it was ridiculous and impractical and somehow exactly right. I love you, Dante said suddenly. Elena's heart stopped. What? I love you. I've been trying not to say it because I didn't want to complicate things, but standing here in the rain with you, I can't keep it in anymore. He turned to face her fully. I love you, Elena. Not because you're Marco's widow, not because I owe you, but because you're brilliant and stubborn, and you make me want to be better than I am. And I know I don't deserve you. I know the past is complicated and messy, and probably unforgivable. But I love you anyway. Elena stared at him, rain streaming down her face, her mind racing. A year ago, these words would have felt like an insult, a betrayal of Marco's memory. But now, I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know, Dante. It's okay, Elena. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to be honest. She should have been angry, should have felt guilty, should have told him this could never work. Instead, she kissed him. It was desperate and rain-soaked and complicated by every emotion they'd carried for the past year, but it was real. And when they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elena knew there was no going back. I don't know if I love you, she said, her hands fisted in his wet shirt, but I think I might be starting to, and that scares the hell out of me. Why? Because I spent 6 years hating you, 6 years blaming you for everything that went wrong. And now I'm standing in your garden, kissing you in the rain, and it feels right. What does that say about me? It says you're human, that you're capable of moving forward even when it's hard, that you're stronger than the grief and anger that almost destroyed you. Or it says I'm betraying Marco's memory. No, Dante's voice was firm. Marco would want you happy. He'd want you to live, not just survive. And if that means building something new with someone who doesn't deserve you, he'd understand. Elena rested her forehead against his chest. This is so messed up. I know. We're probably going to regret this. Probably. But I don't want to stop. Me neither. They stood in the rain until they were both shivering, then went inside and changed into dry clothes. Elena made tea while Dante started a fire in the living room, and they sat together on the couch wrapped in blankets. What do we do now? Elena asked. I don't know. Figure it out as we go. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one. She thought about it. About the apartment she still kept, the independence she'd fought for, the life she'd built on her own, and about this house, this man, this fragile thing growing between them. I want to take it slow, she said finally. Keep my apartment, keep my job, not rush into anything just because it feels good in the moment. Okay. But I also want to see where this goes, carefully. With open eyes and no illusions about what we're doing, which is trying to build something good from something broken, and probably failing, but trying anyway. Dante pulled her closer. I can work with that. They did take it slow. Elena kept her apartment and her job, visiting the brownstone several times a week, but maintaining her own space. They went on actual dates, restaurants and museums, and walks through neighborhoods neither had explored before. They talked about everything: the past, the present, the terrifying uncertainty of the future. It wasn't easy. There were days when the guilt hit Elena so hard she couldn't breathe. Days when she'd look at Dante and see Marco's face, hear his voice asking why she'd chosen the man responsible for his death. But there were also days when it felt right. When she'd catch Dante sketching in the garden, or watch him talk to Ruth about books at the store, or feel his hand in hers while they walked through the city and think, maybe this is allowed, maybe I can have this. A year after their kiss in the rain, Dante proposed something unexpected. I want to start a foundation, he said over breakfast one Saturday. Elena looked up from her coffee. What kind of foundation? For people who fall through the cracks. People like you were. Homeless, struggling, invisible. I want to create housing support, job training, resources, real help, not just temporary fixes. That's ambitious. I have the money and the time, and I need to do something that matters. Something Marco would have been proud of. Elena felt her eyes sting. He would be proud of you for all of it. Will you help me build it? She wanted to say she was too busy with the bookstore, that she didn't know anything about running a nonprofit, that this wasn't her responsibility. But looking at Dante, at this man who'd chosen to tear down everything he'd built and start over, who'd taken his guilt and grief and transformed it into something constructive, she couldn't say no. Yeah, she said. I'll help. They started small, renting a building in Brooklyn, hiring staff who actually understood the challenges their clients faced, creating programs that treated people with dignity instead of pity. Elena found herself running point on the housing program, using her own experience to shape policies that actually worked. She interviewed potential residents, connected them with resources, celebrated when they found jobs and homes and stability. It was hard work, emotionally draining, but it also felt purposeful in a way nothing else had since Marco died. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, she came home to the brownstone because at some point it had become home again and found Dante in the garden. He'd been expanding it, and now it stretched across the entire yard full of vegetables and flowers and a small fountain he'd installed himself. Long day, he asked. The longest. She sat beside him on the bench they'd built together. We had a woman come in today who'd been on the streets for 8 years. 8 years, Dante. And she kept apologizing for being there, for taking up space, for needing help. What did you tell her? That she had nothing to apologize for, that she deserved support, that we were here to help, not judge. Elena leaned against his shoulder. I kept thinking about how that could have been me. If you hadn't stopped that day on the street, if you just kept driving. But I didn't. I know, and I'm grateful. But it makes me angry that it took random chance. That her survival depended on someone caring enough to stop. That's why we're building this. So it's not random anymore. Elena looked at the garden, at the life they'd created in this space, and felt something settle in her chest. We're doing something good here, aren't we? Yeah, we are. 2 years after Elena moved back in, officially this time giving up her apartment and committing fully, they stood in the garden on a spring morning while roses bloomed around them. The foundation was thriving, helping hundreds of people find their footing. Dante's art was being shown in galleries. Elena had been promoted to director of the housing program. I have something for you, Dante said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Elena's heart jumped. Dante, it's not what you think. Just open it. Inside was a key, ornate and old-fashioned, clearly decorative. What is this? A key to the garden. I had it made. He took her hands. This space, everything we've built here, it's as much yours as mine. I wanted you to have something to symbolize that. Elena turned the key over in her hands, feeling the weight of it. It's beautiful. I was going to get you a ring, but that felt wrong. Too much like trying to replace what you had with Marco. He met her eyes. This isn't about replacing him or pretending the past didn't happen. It's about acknowledging what we've built together on our own terms. She kissed him then, soft and certain. I love you. I love you too. I need to tell you something though. Okay. I'll never fully forgive you for what happened to Marco. That choice you made, it changed my life in ways I can't undo. And there's a part of me that will always carry that anger. Dante nodded slowly. I understand, but Elena continued. I also know that people are complicated, that you can do terrible things and still be capable of growth. And I choose to be with you anyway. Not because I've forgotten or excused what happened, but because I believe in who you're trying to become. That's more than I deserve, probably, but it's what I'm offering. They stood in the garden they'd built from ruins, surrounded by life they'd cultivated together. And it felt like a beginning, not a clean one, not simple or uncomplicated, but real. 6 months later, they held the Foundation's annual fundraiser in the Brownstones' backyard. The garden was filled with people, donors, residents, staff, friends. Ruth came from the bookstore. Dante's old lawyer, who'd helped navigate the sale, showed up with his wife. Even some of Elena's former gallery colleagues, the ones who'd stuck by her, made appearances. Elena stood on the back steps watching it all, feeling the weight of the key Dante had given her in her pocket. It's something, isn't it? Ruth said, peering beside her with a glass of wine. It really is. I'm proud of you, for everything you've built both here and at the Foundation. Elena smiled. I had help. Still counts. Ruth clinked her glass against Elena's. Marco would be proud, too. The mention of his name didn't sting the way it used to. Instead, Elena felt warmth. Yeah, I think he would be. Dante found her later after most of the guests had left. They sat in the garden as the sun set, exhausted but content. We did good, he said. We did. Think we can keep doing it. Elena leaned against him, watching the roses sway in the evening breeze. Yeah, I think we can. It wasn't a perfect ending. There was no magical moment where all the pain disappeared or the past stopped mattering. Elena still had days where the grief hit hard. Dante still carried guilt that would never fully fade. But they'd learned to live with it, to build something new without erasing what came before, to choose each other consciously and deliberately every single day. The garden grew, the foundation expanded, their lives intertwined in ways that felt both impossible and inevitable. And in the space where ruin had once stood, something beautiful took root and bloomed.